Good morning and welcome. We are here Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, conducting our Saturday morning cybersecurity webinars. And this morning, I figured we could start with something that I have just watched recently for the second or third time. But I wanted to talk about 0 days. 0 days, which is a reported documentary on the Stuxnet worm, malware. Chris, have you had an opportunity to watch this?
Not yet.
Okay, but do you know a fair bit about Stuxnet?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay. Well, the reason I wanted to cover it is, every time I look at things, I sort of look at them from a little bit different perspective. And before I was looking at it strictly from a, you go United States perspective. But then I started to examine this documentary from a service provider viewpoint. And, what do we do against the next Stuxnet? I guess that's a way of saying it. So the point of this is, from a service provider's standpoint, what can we learn from Stuxnet? How can we put it to use so that something like Stuxnet, maybe not quite as disastrous or critical, but who knows, it could be, so that we're allowed to understand the value of our own efforts to help make sure that we don't make the next documentary. So down at the bottom I say design, attack vectors, partner interests, and lessons learned. So apparently neither one of you have watched the documentary, so we'll have fun with this. We really will. It will be an eye-opener for you both. I wanted to discuss today some of the articles that we had put up on the CyberSecurity Sensei Facebook group, talking about humans being the weakest link in your cybersecurity efforts, ransomware, and how it is becoming the tool of choice for more and more people, because of its high potential for payoff and its low risk. So they're sort of talking about that. And another one that I wanted to discuss, if we have time, is this thing about the U.S. government suing private companies that have poor cyber hygiene. How is that working out? The federal government can do things like that? How is it that they have the power to pursue private companies that don't practice good cyber hygiene? So I think that's a good thing for us to understand and recognize. And then the 0 days Stuxnet documentary. So let me tell you a little bit about 0 days, because I wanted to start with a Stuxnet icebreaker. Yes, ma'am.
Are you sharing your screen or anything? I'm just checking because I'm still staring at a black screen.
Well, let me reshare it and make sure. Da, 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 da. Are you seeing
something now? Yes.
Okay. All right. So Stuxnet was, and again, this is all based on this documentary, which came out in, I think, 2016. But Stuxnet was a worm that Symantec originally discovered and found that it was running around infecting computers out in the world, and part of their research was to go back and find where it came from, where it originated from. So they had to do a lot of reverse engineering, code deconstruction, and literally dissecting this monstrous worm. They said it was something like 10 times larger than any previous malware worm they had ever discovered. So it was monstrous in size, and yet nobody knew where it came from. So, and nobody claimed responsibility. Typically, if you have a malware group that's out there, they call them APT, Advanced Persistent Threats, or APT groups. They tend to brag about what they've done, and they want to be recognized for their abilities. And so, some of these APT groups are pretty vocal in how they themselves crafted or distributed or executed certain malware. Stuxnet was an enigma because it came out, it did very specific things to very specific items, and nobody claimed responsibility for it. So that was the big deal about it. So I wanted to us to spend some fun time on an icebreaker, and these questions all have significance from a cybersecurity service provider viewpoint. Okay, so who named the Stuxnet? Anybody know? Anybody remember how Stuxnet got its name? It wasn't named by the people who created it, and this is a thought. When someone is researching, like Symantec or Norton or Kaspersky, anybody that does malware research, the name they give these things is typically not the name that the individuals who wrote it gave it. The reason is they look for specific characteristics within that malware that they then use to describe the malware and how it's different from other malware. In other words, they say this signature file comes from a malware that we have titled XYZ, in this case, Stuxnet. Symantec were the original company that discovered and named the worm that we now know of as Stuxnet. So, according to, and again, this is all according to the documentary, what name did the NSA team give their project and the malware that they reportedly wrote? Anybody remember? They called it Olympic Games. And, that's the big difference. Olympic Games is what they called it operationally, or OG, when they were writing it or talking about it or those sorts of things. They didn't call it Stuxnet. They called it Olympic Games. So anyway, during whose presidency was Olympic Games developed and first deployed? Anybody remember?
I want to guess Clinton.
Nope.
Oh, Bush.
George Bush. Yep. Good thought on Clinton, but we'll get into that a little bit timeline-wise. Other than utter secrecy, in other words, nobody talk about this, it's classified, the uranium enrichment facility in the Natanz Desert, what did Iran do to keep the network from being infiltrated and compromised? What was their number one tactic they employed to keep Natanz from being the subject of malware?
I want to say air gap.
Yep, exactly right. It was entirely air gap. There was no internet access at the Natanz Desert facility. So the Stuxnet worm reportedly contained a log of every system it had infected. So the Symantec researchers were able to backtrack and locate what they called ground zero, the first computers to be infected. And where were these computers located other than inside the Natanz research facility? Any ideas? And this is
Tehran?
important. Huh?
Was it Tehran?
Nope, but it was in Iran. Here's the thing. They ran it back to 5 Iranian companies that did business with Natanz. So if you think about it, they likely infected the 5 companies who had like service technicians, and they would go in and take their laptops into the Natanz facility and say, oh, your water pressure is low, let's go take a look at the water system, and they'd plug into the Natanz air-gapped network with their service laptops, and that's what reportedly spread the Stuxnet virus into Natanz. In other words, they maybe didn't even have to hire somebody, some sort of spy, to go into Natanz and plug in a thumb drive. They just infected the 5 businesses around Natanz who were likely to drive in there carrying laptops. It's a very, very clever approach. Next one, how many zero-day exploits in total were contained in the original Stuxnet worm? Remember, we talk about 0 days, and they are typically, there's a 0 day. The Stuxnet worm contained more than 1. You remember how many, Chris?
I want to say 5.
It was 4, yeah, but it was unprecedented, the number of 0-day exploits that were all active in this single worm. 4 0-day exploits. So what did the Stuxnet virus contain that they had never seen before in terms of a malware product? Not what it did, or how it got activated, or what it looked for, or what it changed, or anything else. Stuxnet actually contained what they called a kill switch date, after which Stuxnet would cease operating. Stuxnet had an end date. And what do you think that end date was? See, we're getting down to, the interesting stuff about Stuxnet. What world event determined this kill switch date that was programmed into Stuxnet?
The start of the Olympic Games.
No, but that's a good one. Because Stuxnet was supposedly authorized by President Bush, what would happen? I'm sorry?
Started the Gulf War would be my next guess.
No, this occurred after the Gulf War. Years after the Gulf War. The end of Bush's presidency, Stuxnet was programmed to go dormant and stop operating like 9 days before Obama's inauguration. And then subsequently, the NSA showed President Obama Stuxnet and said, we can turn it back on. Would you like us to? And Obama approved continuing operations of Stuxnet. But, they had programmed something in that said, if Bush approved it, that's no guarantee that Obama's going to approve it, so it has to end by the time Obama comes in. Very interesting. After installation, how long did Stuxnet lay dormant before it would activate itself? Any ideas? Because it once you installed it, it did nothing for a certain period of time. It sat for 13 days. And the logic behind that was the amount of time it took to fully refill the gas centrifuges that were the subject of this attack, and restart a cycle of uranium or plutonium enrichment. So it sat for 13 days and did nothing. Well, it did one thing, and we'll get to that in a second. Which operating system was Stuxnet written for? Windows, Mac, Linux, OS2, AIX? Anybody remember? Stuxnet was written for Microsoft Windows. It was in Microsoft Windows. Why? Because the logic controllers, yeah, we'll talk about it here. How specifically did the payload cause damage? It modified the rotational speed of very specific gas centrifuges which were attached to very specific Siemens programmable logic controllers, PLCs. It modified the rotational speed of these gas centrifuges. And you're like, well, you know what? What's the big deal? Well, when those gas centrifuges don't operate at their optimal speed, they literally tear themselves apart. So the thing about it is, when Stuxnet went live, the malware intercepted the rotational speed information that was being provided and overlaid different information. In other words, when the centrifuges changed speed, the Stuxnet virus reported to the PLC controller software that everything was operating optimally. Where did it get that information? And that's where the 13 days came in. It had recorded operational information from the previous 13 days, and it played it back. So while the centrifuges were changing speeds, Stuxnet was replaying the previous 13 days of operational spin information so that it looked normal. It would have normal variations, you know, whatever the speed, it would go up, you know, 0.5% or down 0.5%, which was expected. So it looked like it was live data. You've seen this in all the movies about, you know, spies and all that sort of thing. What do? They go in and they record the data that you see on the security cameras, and then they intercept it and play it back so that when the guy's standing in the elevator, the guards don't see the guy standing in the elevator. Remember? Well, that's what Stuxnet did. It played back the previous data so that the viewers did not see that these PLCs were actually changing the speed of the centrifuges. And here's a, you know, if you guys haven't watched the thing, you don't know this. Centrifuges operated at 1,000 hertz. 1,000 times a second, these centrifuges spun around. They were gas centrifuges, and they spun around. And what they were doing was they were hurling the heavier plutonium outward so that it could be collected. And then it would go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next centrifuge. And as it went along, it became greater and greater concentrations of plutonium to the point where it could be what they called weapons-grade plutonium. But what the Stuxnet did is it changed that centrifuge speed, raised it to as high as 1,410 hertz, and then lowered it to as low as 2 hertz. And by doing so, the little thing inside that was doing the spinning of the gas or the plutonium material that was in there, it would vibrate at the wrong frequencies, and it caused the thing to self-destruct. So what did the NSA claim was the only reason Stuxnet was discovered? And this was, you could tell this was a major bone of contention on the documentary. The NSA claims the only reason it was discovered was the Israeli intelligence operatives modified the Stuxnet and made it more aggressive so that it got out and infected other things and caused operational damage outside of the Natanz facility. So therefore, people like Symantec were called in to find what was going wrong. Symantec did not visit the Natanz facility. They visited other places where this Stuxnet virus had gotten out. According to the NSA, it was because the Israelis had modified the code, the U.S. allies had modified the code and used it themselves, because the U.S. had a very measured program of how to do this, and it was, according to them, destroying hundreds of centrifuges, but the Israelis said that wasn't enough, wasn't fast enough. And we get back to this, politically speaking, Chris, you may know this, but why was the Natanz reactor facility targeted? Don't know? Okay. The Iranians had bought the reactor from France, and France actually installed the reactor. Nobody else wanted to sell it to the Iranians, but France said, yeah, sure, we'll sell you a reactor. And it was getting ready to go active, and the Iranian president, Binajab, or whatever his name was, went on their Iranian television and told everyone that they were developing a weapon that would be used to neutralize Israel. He said that. He basically threatened Israel on Iranian TV and said, we're using this to go destroy the Zionists. And so Stuxnet was born. Olympic Games was born to stop Iran from developing a weapon that they had then said they were going to use against Israel. You never want to get on Israel's bad side. I guess that's a way of saying it. So, lessons learned from this entire malware process. There are some lessons learned that we can apply as service providers. These are some of the lessons learned that I put together by watching this documentary. Number one, no approach that you use, no single piece of software, no tool, no amount of training, even including air gapping, is going to be 100% effective against 100% of the issues, the problems. Okay? Does that make sense? Ah, there I am. I've been turned off this whole time. So anyway, no approach, including air gapping, is completely effective. In other words, you always have to take a holistic approach to your cyber defenses, your cyber operations. No one tool, regardless of what they try and sell you, is going to be your 100% solution. And once you install it, you can go sip pina coladas on the beach. It just doesn't happen. Okay? Number two.
At risk of being that guy that told you everything is a backdoor, I would say if you want 100% security, unplug your computer. Right, but I mean, this demonstrated that even that had its flaws. Even that.
Number two, be watchful of anomalies, not just alerts. In other words, stuff was going wrong and they couldn't understand it. And apparently, the first thing they thought was these nuclear engineers that were running the place had made mistakes. And according to the documentary, they started firing their nuclear engineering specialists because these centrifuges were breaking. Well, that obviously wasn't, in the end, that wasn't the problem. The problem was that they had something that they had never encountered before, and they did not conceive that the problem could have been malware. Okay, so always be watchful of anomalies, not just alerts. When your apps act differently, be suspicious. When your operations act differently, be suspicious. Number 3, understand that malware can originate from extremely well-financed and sophisticated sources. What I mean by that is it's not always some stupid kid pointing and clicking something that he downloaded off the internet. It's not always. Nation states are involved in offensive cyber operations. We've seen this with Ukraine, Russia, and I read something that said of the 4, what did they say, the 4 latest most destructive cybersecurity actions that have been detected in the world, 3 of them originated from Russian sources and were aimed at the Ukraine. So your stuff may be unintentionally the product of some nation state going against some other nation state. So just be aware. It could be. It doesn't necessarily mean it will be, but it's possible. So just be aware that that can occur. And number 4, the higher your organization's data criticality. In other words, how important is your organization's information? The greater your risk is, and the more you have to work at protecting it. Okay? So if you go to work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they're going to have a different level of criticality and therefore a different awareness and literally budget to protect their data than, say, the U.S. Forestry Service. Okay, 2 different government agencies, but the data that they handle is totally different. So the higher the criticality, the more expensive your efforts are going to be, the more resources need to be programmed against it, and the smarter your people have to become as well. You are responsible for training your people so that they can be an effective part of your attack prevention efforts. Any other lessons learned you guys can think of? Good morning, Harminder. Good to see you. Anyone else? Any other lessons learned you have in mind here? I'm gonna say one, and that is that partners today could be enemies tomorrow, because and I think I'm gonna, yeah, we'll get to this in just a second.
Scotty, I have one more lesson learned.
Go ahead.
Supply chain risk management is now becoming more important since we've said earlier that the vendors got hit, and that's how they would know.
Yep.
You, as a service provider, you want to know who is touching your network and make sure they're trusted and making sure that they have the policies in your best interest, or at least very similar policies that you have.
Very good. Very good. That is exactly right. And oh, by the way, that's why we see more and more information, like one of the topics we were going to be discussing today, why the U.S. government is suing private companies. They're suing these private companies because they do business with the federal government and therefore are subject to a lot of the rules and regulations that govern the U.S. government. Good point, Chris. Very good. Okay, 4 questions came out in this documentary that I think it's very helpful for us to consider in reference to offensive cyber operations. Okay, and they describe these 4 questions that you have to ask if you're going to be, going out and doing something that could have a negative effect on somebody else. You need to ask yourself 4 questions. Number 1 is, can we? In other words, is it technically feasible for us to do this? Number 2, should we? In other words, is there a reason why we should do this? Number 3, must we? In other words, do we have to do this in order to preserve our operations or whatever? Let's say somebody's walking up to you, getting ready to poke you in the eye. The first thing you do is you poke them in the eye, and then therefore you stop them from poking you in the eye. That is the question you have to ask. Must we do this? Is it essential for us to do this? And then, of course, number 4, the big question, are we allowed to do this? And that's what modern-day cyber operations, they mentioned that, for example, the NSA has no legislative authority to conduct offensive cyber operations anywhere in the world. The NSA can't do that. They aren't allowed to. So what the U.S. government did is they created U.S. Cyber Command, which did have the authority to conduct offensive cyber operations. And oh, by the way, guess who the majority of the people in Cyber Command came from, where they came from? They were in the U.S. military previously, but then they got hired onto NSA's payroll. So they were working for Cyber Command. They were working for NSA as part of Cyber Command, and therefore the NSA didn't do it. Cyber Command did. It's sort of a interesting mix of questions, but not everybody is allowed to do everything all the time. And NSA is not allowed to conduct offensive cyber operations. So they created Cyber Command that is part of their charter. Any questions? Any questions? Okay. Man, I sure had fun doing this, putting this together. If you can, go watch 0 Days. If you have Amazon Prime, go watch 0 Days. Amazingly enough, I went out on Wikipedia and said, what is this thing about 0 days? And it was like this much. Not much at all. However, if you go over to Stuxnet, there's all sorts of stuff about it. So if you go look for 0 Days, it just says it's a documentary that supposedly talks about NSA operations against Iran. But then when you go over to Stuxnet, there's all sorts of stuff. It talks about the Siemens programmable logic controllers, talks about the gas centrifuges, talks about, all sorts of good stuff. Symantec and why their job was so difficult, because certain the Stuxnet virus only did certain things. And oh, by the way, they found that there were multiple versions of Stuxnet that were out there in the world. Multiple versions. And those different versions were originally by the NSA and then by Israel. So that's how Stuxnet got caught. Okay, cool. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I sure did. Now let's go back to the other stuff that we were going to talk about. Anybody have something to bring up from this week? Any activities? You had an interview, read a good article, watched something good on TV that you haven't already shared? Nobody? Okay, that's fine. I hope you had time to read the article about humans being the weakest link in cybersecurity. I wanted to get comments on that. What do you think? Do you think that humans are the toughest issue? And if so, why? And if so, what do you think would help? Thoughts?
Yes, Scotty, can you repeat the question, please?
Sure.
Yes.
I put an article out on Facebook, a link to an article that said that humans were the weakest link in an organization's cybersecurity hygiene or efforts. And I was wondering what you thought about that. Do you think that's true? And if so, what can you do about it?
Oh, yes. So I agree with this one, and it is a very good topic, and we need awareness of all this. So because I'm working in the IT analyst, I'm getting the calls. People ask, do I click for this link? I got an email from, it looked like my boss or this thing. So the first of all, I am agree with this. Human is a weakest link in the security. There are so many reasons. I just discussed with couple of them. The first of them, how our technology is growing day by day, and the second thing, except the IT people. IT people is also including, they don't have a awareness where they have to be clicked, and people don't have a much time. As soon as they open the email, they just click right away. If it is not open, they click couple of times. The same thing happened with me. So I just got an email and I don't have a authorized to open the email because I just want to check the online schedule. So I clicked couple of times, it did not open. Then I just got a message on the Teams from my boss, and she told me you are not authorized to click. Please don't change this document. So she sent me a message, please don't change, because I just want to look the online schedule, on-call schedule. So then she told me you are not authorized. So, and the second thing, the people need a time-to-time training, the cybersecurity training, because we are a technology-based, our bank, our medicals, to book a ticket for the airline, to book the ticket for the train, to purchase something. Every day we are getting so many emails, and the emails, because you already discussed in the last previous weekend, because they said, oh, you get a discount, you can get a bonus, click this link, it is a 1 week, it is a 1 week, it is the time is going fly on, so just click right away, and we need only 10 people, you get a bonus. Such kind of attractive thing. Technical people understanding, but some of the technical people have also an issue. The reason when we are getting so many emails, we don't take a time to click on the link, we don't read, we don't have a time to look at the if this email is legitimate, we don't look at is it a right path, we just click right away. And how we are excited, we are clicking couple of times. The same thing we are getting. The human beings, I know the machine itself, if the machine have a weakness, we don't have a proper policy in place, we don't have a proper equipment. I know but the most and common thing is a human being, wherever, because this is a human being is responsibility to implement the security, to implement the patch, to see and also check whatever equipment, whatever computer server we are using, everything is updated. Everything comes on the human being. So that is my thought. I really like it. This is a really good topic. We have to work on. Everybody have to work on. Thank you, Scott.
Sure. Thank you, Harminder. And you mentioned this. You said that we need to train the customers, but you also pointed out a good point, and that is that even the IT team can be considered customers. And the customers look at you to provide more appropriate information on this. So how do you become an authority, And I agree. The training is about the only way you can do it. And companies that are real serious about this, or organizations that are real serious about this, make the training mandatory. And I thought, if you guys saw on the Facebook article, we had something from, I think his name's Robert, who just joined the group. He pointed out, he said that there is a new term now called whaling, in which they do phishing efforts, but they are specifically focused on the executives within a particular organization or entity. They call it whaling, because if they can get to that guy or that girl, then they have basically infiltrated the whole company. Instead of trying to go for the little fish, they go for the big whale. And the approach is different. And they've learned that. Humans react in a certain way. So what our role is is to try and help people become more cyber aware so that they do, just like you said, Harminder, they slow down a little bit and they think before they start clicking. I'm so busy, wait a minute. Look at this, think about it. Now decide whether to click it or not, you know? And that's what we need to do with our customers and stuff. Any other discussions about that before we go to the next one?
Hey, Scotty, I will agree that humans are the weakest link, but we're not the only weakness, if that makes
true.
sense.
Oh, yeah. No, you're right.
And our CIO said something interesting on LinkedIn one day.
Uh-huh.
He said about technical debt. And I'll give a too long didn't read version of technical debt.
Okay.
We don't provide the most up-to-date services that are the most secured, if that is what I'm thinking he means by that from what I read. And having, I won't say the latest, greatest updates, but the most secured update is also helpful in this, in preventing the humans from making mistakes, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good one.
That's assuming we know that humans are the weakest link. So yes,
right.
We're right. Humans are the weakest link, but what are we going to do about it from a service provider viewpoint?
Correct. And the biggest thing, well, if you remember the month of October, we harped on it in our forums, and I've covered it here several weeks. The month of October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And our organization, for example, did, gosh, what was it, 8, 10, 12 different things, activities, to try and help people get more knowledgeable. They enacted new capabilities. They empowered the customers to play a part in this, using, tools that we use every single day. They did that all during Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So, they were very proactive. Very proactive. So, very good one. Thank you, guys. Next one, ransomware. What's the big deal with ransomware? Well, in the article that I shared, they talked about it, and they said of the 5 ransomware variants, 5 ransomware variants reported in the second half of 2021, 4 of them appear to have been sourced from Russia. 4 of 5 appear to have come from Russia or using code that originated in Russia. So the article pointed out, they said, let's see, hackers around the world consider conducting ransomware attacks the most profitable scheme on the internet. More profitable even than selling illegal drugs via dark net markets and stealing and selling stolen credit cards. Ransomware. Isn't that scary? And, ransomware has very negative consequences. That's usually the point of it. It goes in, and one of the major approaches is it steals or encrypts data to where you can't get to it. You can't unencrypt it. And then they say, well, we'll decrypt it for you. We'll send you the key. Just send us money. And the money is usually in the form of what? When you pay a ransom, what is it normally paid? How is it paid? And why Bitcoin? Yep. Why crypto?
And that cannot be traced.
Right.
It's very hard to trace. My fault.
Yep. Cryptocurrency is, and this is one of the reasons why they created it. It doesn't originate from a country. The United States prints dollars or issues dollars, and the Japanese, they issue yen, and Mexico issues pesos and all that sort of stuff. But cryptocurrency didn't originate with a country, and it has the ability to be purchased, transferred, and turned back in without divulging your information. That's the reason why crypto is so popular with malware gangs, because they think it provides them anonymity. The issue is that in order to use, and this has occurred, there was one particular malware that they were looking for, and they said, okay, this group of people asked for a certain amount for their malware activities, and the ransom was paid. And so what the federal government did is they monitored all the banks to say which banks showed a deposit of about this much money. And they actually caught the ransomware gang, because what they did was they transferred their cyber currency into regular currency, and it was at that point the regulated networks detected it. So, okay, you may be able to get cyber currency, but what if you can't cash it? So it's a good question to consider when you're looking into things like this. You know.
So I have another question, and who accept these currencies? I know the cryptocurrencies, but USA, do they accept in cryptocurrency? Can I buy anything? Because I have no idea about it.
Yeah, cryptocurrency is accepted by a number of exchanges, and you know it just depends. And then a lot of companies went public and said, we will accept things like Bitcoin for payments. Tesla did it. Tesla went online. Elon Musk said, we will accept Bitcoin if you want to buy a Tesla. You know? So,
oh, yeah. Got it. Okay.
So it became a medium of exchange. It is still not widely accepted, but there are still ways to, you know, cash it in.
Okay, thank you, got it.
Sure. Okay, next topic. U.S. government suing companies with poor cyber hygiene. This was in relation to a company that provided educational services, and the challenge was that they had 4 data breaches, major data breaches, in the last 5 years. In other words, they were the worst in terms of cyber hygiene, so the Federal Trade Commission sued them and basically said, you're not allowed to do business anymore because you're such a risk. Any thoughts on that? What does that bring to mind? What comes to mind for me is, why is the federal government meddling in the affairs of private citizens and turning their focus on private companies and saying, you can't do business like that anymore? The federal government, our taxpayer dollars, are paying for the federal government to sue companies because someone in the federal government thinks that what they're doing affects American consumers. So therefore, they need to stop it. Thoughts? What do you guys think? The risk I see in that is that, where do you stop? If you start doing it, you know, one place, what's to stop you from doing it in 100 places? You know, it's that old slippery slope of where is it acceptable? And oh, by the way, we as taxpayers are paying for all of this. And I'm just using this as an example, the federal government suing certain bakeries because they were employing what the federal government called discriminatory practices against people, our taxpayer dollars were used to run this bakery out of business because they didn't do what the federal government thought they were supposed to do. You know, that to me causes me to go, is that really why I have elected these people in my government? Just something I'm asking. But the point of it is, and you know, if you think all the way back, for like SolarWinds, when they had their supply chain, somebody got into the SolarWinds patching activity and distributed malware within the SolarWinds updates. And we talked about it at that time and said, what is the, you know, what would be the absolute king of malware if you were going to try and get into supply chain? And the king of the king that you would want to try and topple is Microsoft. If you could get into the Windows updates, if you could get your malware into patch day, for example, how many millions, if not billions, of computers would all be infected with your malware in the course of a couple days? You know, so of course they think about the bad guys, think about this is the people that we want to try and infect the most because it gets us fame and we end up being able to charge more for our services or whatever. But the federal government turns around and says, well, wait a minute. People are using Microsoft computers at Department of the Treasury, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Department of Defense. You know, they're using Windows computers, so therefore the federal government has a vested interest in Microsoft's ability to remain secure. So if Microsoft doesn't remain secure, the federal government can sue Microsoft. Thoughts? Any ideas about that?
Yes, Scotty. So I agree with you because of federal government, when anybody open any business and the federal government provide the rules, policies to implement, to follow, and provide the good standard, good services to the customer. If anybody not follow all these rules and regulation, this is responsibility for the federal government. You want to make sure who is running the business, doesn't matter. It is a small scale business, it is a large scale business. Customer confidentiality, customer services, whatever we are doing the business, they have to be do their best. Why? Because the customers are paying them to get the services. The federal government have to be take the action. If they don't take the action, everybody take lightly security, whatever the services the business providing. So I agree with them. I know, because whatever we have to be provide our best services if we want to survive in the business, if we want to survive in the competitions. So we have to be, and time to time, federal government, other authorities, they have to be checked, and they are, so that's why they want a customer reviews ki how the business going, what the issues they have. So that's why they have a lines, that's why they have a phone numbers, email if anybody have an issue, and they also see how many numbers of people complained about the business, where there are weakness. Sometimes companies hide, they want to be covered their own basis, and they just tie up the customer. Okay, we did this thing wrong, we can give you free membership, we can give you a free, because they want to cover themselves. They don't want to be let other people know, they don't want to be federal government know, they don't want to be anybody complain them. So once a while is okay if anybody do same thing, repeat and repeat, then the federal government have definitely taken action, cancel the license, check the rules and regularity, they follow the policies and everything. It is very important. Why? Because we are paying the tax, how you mentioned, we are a taxpayer. So that's so that is my thoughts. That's I think about that.
I understand what you're saying. My concern is, just like they show in the movies and stuff, who is watching the watchers? Who is making sure that the federal government is truly acting in the best interests of the consumers and maybe not in their own best interests? There's actually a bill I heard that was being circulated, not very popular in Congress, that would stop Congress from being able to invest in things like the stock market. Why? Okay. Because Congress can steer the stock market, and therefore Congress can make money. Selfish people within the government can make money on things that are about to occur that they know about. It's called insider information. And so therefore they're saying if the federal government is the ultimate insider, then the federal government can't be involved in these markets. So it's a case of there's a very old saying, and it says power corrupts, and ultimate power ultimately corrupts. So the more power you give somebody, the more possible it becomes in their minds, maybe, that they can use that power for their own selfish ideas instead of for the good of humanity or whatever. So just something to think about. Who's watching the watchers? Who's auditing the auditors? Just something to think about. Any thoughts or ideas, guys? We're out of time. This is the end of our time.
I know these are a tough question. That I never think about that. Who's watching the watcher? I know that.
Right.
Right. Yes, I know.
That's why, one of my last statements, I have no issues with what's called the Inspector General for an organization. The Inspector General is designed to be outside of those sorts of political discussions, and therefore they're supposed to be very objective. So, when in doubt, bring in the IG and let them take a look. Just something to think about. All right, guys, I appreciate it very much, and hope you had a great Saturday. I hope you continue to have a great weekend, and we'll talk next week. Okay?
Thanks,
everybody.
Nice weekend. Thank you.